I would say I think they left the best for last, but everyone was amazing all day that I can't unfortunately use that statement. So I will have the other partners here do their introductions, and then we'll launch into some questions.
So good afternoon. My name is Jay Yellen. I am a U.S. Navy trauma surgeon, and I am currently stationed here in a military-civilian partnership at the University of Pennsylvania.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Shaw. I'm a sports psychologist with the Cleveland Guardians baseball team. And as I like to say, I'm not a real doctor. So if you have an issue, you should see Jay.
So we actually had gone over a couple questions together, but then I heard all these amazing talks today, and so I'm going to maybe surprise you guys with some questions I just came up with, so we'll put them on the spot. So how are advancements in tech and AI affecting how you look at and approach peak performance in your particular space?
Well, I mean, I think Nicholas addresses some of this, right? There's a lot of like promise and enthusiasm and cool startups, and I mean, obviously, in my world of professional baseball, guys are usually interested, right? They want to gain an edge, keep an edge, and if they have the cash to do that, they're often willing to do it. I mean, the problem is like, what is the real benefit that you could expect beyond the placebo effect? And that's sort of the hang-up for us. So, Nicholas, you have more.
I mean, definitely tech is being used more and more every day in everything that has to do with strength and conditioning, and often on-field sports as well. I mean, I work with all the IU athletes. The football players are all wearing a monitor. The entire starting lineup wears a monitor every practice, every game. We have real-time ECG data from them. We have their GPS, inertial. There's also an IMU sensor in there, so we have all this physics data about how they actually practice every game. So it's being used a lot nowadays in collegiate sports, and I'm sure at other levels too.
Yeah, I mean, for load monitoring, fatigue monitoring, and at some point you can become a little bit prescriptive. You can say, okay, you had these different accelerations and decelerations, and now we can make a different recommendation for recovery management. But I think ultimately that's where tech could guide us. It becomes a more objective input for what a skilled practitioner could do should they have access to all that data.
Yeah, I'm sort of the lone person here. So my interest really has to do with developing small surgical teams specifically for combat casualty care. So we're talking about austere environments and things like that. So we are interested in the development of the team in a controlled environment, and so we can use certain parameters, say in the simulation scenario, but in actual practice, in the downrange environment, in the austere environment, we have limited access to technology, not only for the team members, but also limited for patient care as well.
How do you discuss mental health as related to peak performance in your space? So what's the intersection of mental health and peak performance in your individual spaces?
Well, I'll start on that because it is an interesting topic. The Department of Defense has a current strong interest in the wake of the last 20 years' wars. There is a great deal of interest in mental health amongst all the members of the DoD. Again, in my specific area, we do get concerned about the criticality and the magnitude of the events that maybe some young practitioners are seeing potentially for the first time, and how do you deal with that? So we are very sensitive as commanders or leaders of those groups. We are, in fact, very sensitive to that. And the way we do it in austere environments is through debriefing, through psychological safety, and hopefully, if the scenario permits, some adequate sleep and some time off a little bit. But that can be very problematic depending on the scenario.
I can sort of give a little bit of insight into a spring training style talk that I would give to some of our players. I mean, prior to being in baseball, I was with the Olympic Committee, and we would get athletes as soon as they were on the national team and then try to get them on the podium at the Olympic Games. And if you're trying to be the best in the world at anything, you can't really go it alone. And athletes are accustomed to know, they sometimes specialize coaches in addition to their regular coaches. So we were really freed up to say, like, we're here to support you, whether it is performance enhancement or when it's just like regular human development or counseling, or if it is clinical mental health conditions, we're here to support you. So sort of pivoting into baseball, I use sort of a similar mantra of statistically, it's very unlikely that you would have gotten yourself here. And we know that there's going to be things that happen across the season, and it might even just be the accumulation of the grind. Like 162 games is a lot of games, and we would anticipate at the end of the season you're going to be much more fatigued than you are at the start of the season. So both proactively we'll do screening, but then things, someone's going to lose something, something's going to happen, you're going to be in a slump. We're available to support reactively, but it's always framed around anything that we can do to lighten the load. My staff and myself, anything we can do to get you closer to your goal. Let's give it a go.
I think in some ways also, at least for example, in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of stats that talk about silent suffering, that they're high performers, entrepreneurs, and yet they're in these positions where they can't show that they're struggling with mental health. And so I imagine that at least in some of your environments, you see the same thing.
I mean, yeah, sometimes we'll have players open. I mean, I had a session recently with a player who was only at the end of the season in his exit meeting, he was able to articulate what was really, and we suspected that something was going on, and we tried to offer resources. But I mean, when you're not ready to talk about what's going on, it's really hard to provide a talk-based therapeutic intervention. But I mean, all we can do is have this consistent messaging that resources are available within the club, resources are available with our external networks. We have awesome health insurance, fortunately, so we try to get people connected.
At IU, athletic department, we have 650 collegiate athletes, and we have 2 full-time psychologists who work there. When the athletes arrive for the pre-participation physical, that includes a session with the psychologist. They do a workup on them there. Because concussions can regularly result in mental health crises, every athlete who we diagnose with a concussion or suspected concussion has to meet with the psychologist at least once. We try to keep a relatively large firewall up between sports medicine, which is, I would say, extremely un-HIPAA compliant. It's basically a big giant room. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows what's going on. So we put up a huge firewall so that the psychologists can work with the athletes without us knowing what's going on. So I rarely talk about a patient with our psychologist unless we reach the stage of needing medication. But it's an important aspect to peak performance and just dealing with whatever is inside their head that's keeping them from peak performance, and then certainly worry about them after injuries, whether it's physical or neurological. And so we have them see a psychologist for that as well.
The concept of silent suffering is just being talked about in the surgeon world, and it's just something that's coming to the forefront. And mental health issues have not really been talked about in our profession, so to speak. And so I think over the next year or so, you're going to see a large volume of literature. We talk about wellness, we talk about burnout, and I have my own certain opinions about that, but I think that silent suffering and true mental health is an issue in the surgeon population.
I mean, would you think building upon some of the information or regulations around sleep with training at surgical residences, isn't there more there to protect time away that people could actually recover? I mean, in the world of sport, we've had this, emergence of interest in sleep there's physical rest and then there's actual sleep. But looking at, obviously, when you restrict, there's certain performance deficits. But when you extend sleep opportunity, there was really nice performance gains. Sherry Ma, when she was with Stanford, did a lot of that work. But do you think that there's precedent looking at other important biological functions?
Yeah, I mean, the restricted work hours for trainees in all specialties really comes on the heels of some medical errors that were made, and this dates back 25, 30 years now. And I think it is much healthier. Just my own observation as a surgical educator, I think it's much healthier. The residents who then become surgeons are more normal. They interact with people better. They have outside interests. And so I think those are all good. I am not certain of its impact ultimately on mental health issues, but I do agree that sleep, I can tell you on a personal basis, sleep's really important. And so that's an issue. And that's an issue in combat casualty care as well. And even for the warrior, for our warriors that protect our country, sleep is a major issue for them as well. So sleep's really important.
I didn't know if you wanted to add something. Sure. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, economic, political, and so how does that change the way you think about optimal brain health, not just surviving, but trying to thrive against all of that, stay resilient against all of that?
Yeah, my experience with I mostly am working with young people, or mostly undergraduate athletes, and they're incredibly resilient. It's scarcely even, they don't seem to worry. I think that's, they're not exposed enough. The world that they've grown up with is what's in front of them right now, and it's not scary to them, and it doesn't particularly bother them. So I hear very few complaints about it, actually.
Yeah, I think resiliency is one of those buzzwords, both in surgical training, the medical world, and certainly in the military. It certainly has implications on a whole host of things: how we train, how we deploy efforts, lines of effort, and I'm not talking just military, I'm talking in the hospital. And I think there's a lot of buzzword around it, and I don't think there's enough understanding of what that actually means and how we deal with that effectively. I think that I'm able to recognize the trainee or a corpsman or a junior officer who doesn't have resilience, but I'm not really sure how I train them to become more resilient. I think we're just scratching the surface on that.
Well, it also makes me curious about a conversation between what's the aligned definition of resilience? What's the generational definition of resilience? Does it mean the same thing to a Gen X than a Gen Z? And how do you account for that across those populations?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I was just talking to Preston a little while ago about that, because I come from an era where, you were on call every other night and you just did your work for 5 years and then you became a surgeon. And then we can't really do that anymore, right? And so I think there is a generational implication, and I think that's good. But again, personally, from my aspect as someone who trains and educates and leads teams, I'm not sure that I have a great handle on it yet.
I was working with the Olympic Committee when the COVID pandemic hit, and first it was announced that the Olympics would be postponed, and we didn't know how long would they be postponed for, what were they really canceled. And I mean, this is obviously, young athletes have been really working their whole lives to even have a chance to get to Olympic Games. So it was a fairly daunting thing to be intervening and supporting around. And I had pre-existing relationships with all these athletes for usually many years when the pandemic hit, because we were just like a couple months out from when the Games should have been that summer in Tokyo of 2020. And so I just remember quickly being able to frame this like, hey, this is a time of uncertainty. We don't know how long this is going to last, but you're dealing with uncertainty all the time as an athlete, right? You have to travel to a competition. Are you really going to get there? I don't know. Are they going to lose your bike? Is your gun going to get stuck at customs? Like could you get injured in the last practice before you leave? Could you get injured? Could something happen? Could you get sick? Like, you've been dealing with tolerating uncertainty and staying focused on your goals your whole life. So I think we were reframing around COVID. And then, of course, once competition started back up, everyone was so anxious about testing positive, right? And just saying, like, yes, this is a novel risk, and that's why it feels so scary, but you've been dealing with the risk of injury in advance of competition, again, for your entire athletic career. How do you get yourself to compete? Oh, okay, well, this is what I just, acknowledge it, and then I move on. Okay. So, I mean, I think maybe in sport, at least, we were pretty well positioned to borrow from pre-existing conceptual models around risk. And then regarding, defining, for me, the technical definition is like you're bumbling along, you hit some sort of obstacle, there's a decrease in your capacity to perform or your well-being, and then resilience is recovery to your previous level of functioning, which is great. And if it's a high level of functioning, that's what you're after. But we're also looking for post-traumatic growth, which would be rising to perform even better than either a better level of performance or a different level of well-being or satisfaction or something as a consequence of that adverse event. So, we talk about this stuff proactively. Baseball players are also weird. Imagine if you got a 30% on whatever exam or anything in your life, 30%. Batting average, if you're hitting 3 out of 10, balls that are thrown to you, you're like one of the best hitters in the whole league. So we acknowledge that they're not they're not the most common, motivated by that type of reinforcement schedule. But for them, they're hungry for it.
And how does this, what are the questions that we should be asking in the space of brain capital and peak performance to try to improve that peak performance?
Well, for me, I think for my teams, it really revolves around being a learning organization. And to be an effective learning organization, because we have to be a learning organization to deal with the uncertainty, the unknown. If you're in a combat zone and you have a mass casualty, how are you going to deal with that? Those types of unknowns. So if you're a learning organization, you're better adapted. You're better at what Colonel John Boyd described as the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act. You're able to do that quicker if you're a learning organization. But to be a learning organization, you have to be a learner. So individual learning is very important. So what we do in our team is we have not imposed, it's totally up to the individual, but we have a reading list. And the reading list is not medical, although it could be. It's not necessarily military, but we do have some military books. But it's also fiction. It's also the ability to use that fiction knowledge to maybe develop an answer to an unusual question. So we use that to develop our peak performance. So that's what we do on our team.
Okay, in the world of baseball, there's the assessment component, right? So if guys are going to get drafted we try to learn as much as we can before we bring a player in, and then it's in part my department's job to help accelerate their development as a human being. Think about anyone who's really good at one thing. They're going to have these other underdeveloped or less developed parts of who they are. If you think about, I came from the world of gymnastics, and you look at these little gymnasts on TV when they're Olympic Games, they just haven't socialized. They didn't go to the mall, they didn't go to the it's different. Anyway, so baseball players face the same things. So we're trying to sort of anticipate what's next and where their vulnerabilities are and help them develop against that, or even to develop certain strengths. Internally we have these these pillars that we, have generated from review of literature and then talking to a lot of players and happen to have worked in baseball within my team for many years of on the field performance sort of pillars and then off the field performance pillars. And we educate guys regularly, off of this.
I mean, I guess both professionally and personally, practice and training is the way you get to peak performance. And it doesn't matter whether it's scientific, whether it's clinical practice, or whether it's being a high-fly turkey catcher, or doing nighttime search and rescue in the backcountry of the Teton Mountains. It's about practice and training, and and education as well, and learning.
Yeah, I would certainly want to glom onto that comment, because I think for our small team to be highly effective and nimble, mastery of each person's world is vitally important. Without that, it's a no-starter.
Very well said. Yeah.
Sorry, when you say mastery of the world, do you mean of the job-specific tasks?
Yeah, what they have to do in our team environment. So if it's a nurse or my corpsman or something, whatever team member, they have to be masters at that. There has to be no ability to be fazed by the unusual circumstance so that they can adapt quickly.
Because I would add that in sport, it's really normalized. I mean, athletes are doing their tasks with their bodies. So it's very normalized that we're looking at their nutrition, their sleep, how much time are they putting in the training room, doing prehab and rehab. I mean, there's this very thorough approach to support what you actually see on TV. But there's a whole lot of hours of work that happens every day to support that.
Sure. Do we have time for questions? Yeah. All right. Kelly?
Yeah. Hi, thanks. This is really exciting. I'm excited about these kind of conversations because I think that athletics translate into the workplace and into our personal life, right? So there's a lot of extrapolations. But Lindsay, one of the things I'm wondering, I had the opportunity to visit Cubs training camp in Arizona, which is, by the way, mind-blowing, and meet with their mental skills coach a number of years ago. And one of the things that I was struck by was they do a lot of mental skills training around meditation, visualization, not the kind that you're talking about, but visualizing the game and thinking through the process. And he was, to me, it was a very interesting conversation because, again, he was not looking to mitigate problems. He was looking to optimize performance. And by doing that, problems arose because there was less stigma. So people will come in because they felt like doing the mindfulness practice and the visualization practice every day was going to help their game. But then other things come up in that conversation because they feel more comfortable with that. So I'd be curious to know, I understand the mental health issues. What about the performance optimization and how is that working in sports nowadays? There's so much data about why that is helpful and builds resilience, to your point, Commander. So
yeah, I mean, there's a many-decade history in Major League Baseball where teams have mental skills providers on staff, and again, I mean, if you just think of like a good coach is going to teach an athlete. I mean, think about if you played sports or even had a really good teacher, around challenging content, they're going to tell you how to approach it, right? They're going to sort of give you instruction on how to manage this thing and how to persist. I mean, we say my department is our job is to teach you how to use your mind as a tool to enhance your performance and to make your performance more consistent. And then I think a little bit underneath that, my job is to just help you get to know yourself a little bit better and then be less surprised by yourself in certain scenarios. So you can get out there and be like, well, here I go. I'm about to step in the box, feeling a little anxious. Hey, I expected that. Now I get back to work. So, I mean, there is a long history of mental performance, and it is a nice hook. I mean, sometimes players do come to me because they are in crisis. And I think when that happens, I've done a good job at helping them know that I'm a person to turn to. But the hook is performance, right? So if we're talking about how you can hit better, how you can stay focused, how you can recover between pitches and stuff like that, and then, oh, by the way, this is this other thing going on. I mean, it creates a foundation that people can be open with you.
Hi. So it occurs to me that if you left out the word peak, you could still have all said exactly the same things. How do you improve performance? Except we find it sexy to hear about elite teams and the professionals who do that. But in my case, maybe I had my peak, and I want to get back. I want to just improve my performance. So am I right about that? Could you have just left out the word peak?
Absolutely.
We're just a bunch of dumb medical people, so for my team,
I want to improve performance.
there's no doubt. You hit it on the
Fine,
head.
even though it's not going to be your idea of a peak.
Well, you're taking the pressure off. Let's just all get out there and, I will often say that, like, this will increase your chances of getting the outcome you want. Okay, there's nothing I can do to guarantee the outcome, but if we're focusing on the process and the process of performance in the right way, like, now we've got a chance.
I see Preston, and then I saw a hand back here. Oh, and Michael. Preston.
Just to name it, right? We're still often referencing a pathological approach of mental health, right? Psychologists are trained in pathology. We wait until you're broken and then we fix you. Much of what you're talking about, though, and specifically in medical education, is we're developing people to make meaning of extreme experiences, and we can do that without labeling it trauma. We can just say, this is the path you chose, this is what it is, this is how to deal with it. I think there's probably a moment in time now that we can start talking about the normalization of growth without being pejorative. And I want to just get your thoughts on that as developers and educators.
I was traumatized, President. No, I think you're right. That's why the training pipeline, whether you're a surgeon, a pediatrician, a Navy SEAL, you pick that pipeline, and that's your training. So I think you're spot on. It's not a negative thing. It's something that has to be taught, and it's something that has to be inculcated in the culture of that community that says it's okay and we're going to deal with this in the appropriate fashion. So I think you're spot on.
So,
Can I? Okay.
there you go. I really enjoyed Nicholas's comments about the placebo, and I was wondering, given the big effects that it can have, why not use placebo in all of your athletes and all of your training regimens? And I guess what I'm thinking of also is I know a lot of athletes, especially baseball players, perhaps have a lot of superstitious things. They touch their cap, they do various movements, it ticks, all kinds of stuff like that that they think will improve their performance. So we think of those, I think, as like superstitions. I'm wondering what the relationship is between superstition and placebo effect.
I think,
I mean, I think everybody uses a placebo effect all the time. So, and I think sports is not any different there. So I think it's a major part. Having a positive outlook and a positive belief is essential for everything that we do, whether it's sports, whether it's anything else in life. Doesn't matter what.
I was just going to say that my mind's drifting. I've got to get on my flight soon. Placebo effect. Okay, so the rapport, right? The dynamic between the provider and I'll say the player. Other people might say the patient explains like 70 to 80% of treatment outcomes, right? So if you have the right dynamic, and we talk about this sort of ad nauseum, and our players know, there's a coach that you just have like a good vibe with, and they're able to receive more of that coaching information, so it feels really normal. And hey, if I'm not the right person for you, I can help you find someone else. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all, because ultimately I want the best thing for you. I think that's something that we're trying to harness all the time.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you guys. This has really been awesome. I'm going to kind of try to connect some threads and push you a little bit on it. So connecting, Nicholas bringing up objective biomarkers, which I think is really important to go beyond subjective self-reports, which is notoriously incomplete and biased, et cetera. And then what Lindsay has been talking about in terms of kind of coaching and mental skill improvement, and Jay, you talked about that too. But whether we're talking about cognitive skills required for the sport or emotional skills, resilience, et cetera, to where do you see the kind of frontier, the cutting edge, where I think going beyond like it's one size fits all to everybody has different sort of talent, strengths, and motivators, and so understanding those to get you from here to there in a way that's specific for your job, right? Do you see that as sort of the next step?
I mean, that's why I don't pass out a workbook. Like you get the same mental skills as, like that's just, I mean, okay, we're talking about elite sport. Is there a place for workbooks in a developmental sport? Absolutely, because we all have to learn these basic things. But sure, at the elite level, does it have to be very tailored to you, Michael, and your performance? And then the more I can understand about your history and your vulnerabilities and the way that you were parented and your early coaching experiences and the types of stressors that you have going on right now, I mean, the more of an effective tool that I can be in our working dynamic.
I think for me, your comments resonate. Number one is, can we identify the surgeon, emergency medicine doctor, nurse, corpsman, who is going to thrive in that challenging environment? And if so the selection process, can we handpick those people to send them downrange and leave the others back here to do sort of more controlled stuff? And then secondly, if we can find people who don't meet those criteria, can we train them to meet those criteria? So that's exciting stuff. So figuring out what to measure, of course, is the question, but that's exciting.
Hi, I wanted to ask a quick question. Just connecting. Yeah, thank you. Thinking about how you reconcile scientific rigor with also adopting more nuanced strategies, and just from previous experience, a little bit about me. Like when I played tennis in high school, I read a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, where they talked about, it's a phenomenal book, but they heavily drew upon Eastern influences of Buddhism and a lot of contemplative techniques that may not be immediately apparent through Western, randomized controlled trials or Western medicine that's very quantitative. But I was curious to hear how, in achieving peak performance, whether there's other metrics and other ways of drawing upon more alternative, philosophies or alternative metrics beyond just beyond RTCs or more conventional science-based paradigms.
So, I think we've learned a lot from, trying to study and understand Eastern philosophies, non-traditional medicine. So I never do that. But when I'm switching between various hats, one of the hats I always have to think is, when it comes down to effective treatments, spending money, whether it's someone's personal money, whether it's resources at a national level or institutional level, I do feel like there needs to be scientific rigor to it. So while you can learn a lot from studying alternative therapies, at the end of the day, when it comes to resource management, you want to have actual evidence. Because we do have a limited amount of financial resources in this country and all countries.
I have to piggyback a question on that. Do you think that affects other countries being able to excel in certain areas faster than the U.S. because they don't have that restriction? Maybe they're more inclined to believe in Eastern medicine or Eastern philosophies, data?
I can't think of an example of that. So.
I thought where you were going to go with that was just this idea of do you have a hack? I mean, that was one of the questions we were sort of talking last night about. And people will say what's the trick? What's the, what can I do? And I think, to address your question, at least in elite sport, like I said before, if you are putting healthy food in your body, if you are spending 9 hours horizontal, not on your phone at night, attempting to achieve, physical rest and recovery, if you're, depending on the type of sport that you're in, if your cardiovascular fitness is dialed, if your strength is pretty dialed, that's the type of stuff, a whole lot of effort should be going into that. I mean, when I was at the Olympic Committee, I had a psychophysiology lab, and I would somehow have athletes show up and say, I want to do this. I'm like, I know what your sleep is like. You know, like whatever we do in there is going to be totally undone by the fact that you're spending an insufficient time in bed every single night. So like, why don't you nap instead of coming to see me? You know, I mean, I think you want to be really real about think about all of our lives. If you're having 6 cups of coffee in the morning because you stayed up late to try to do something, like you're just sort of undermining yourself. So I think the very sort of unsexy, tried and true, mantras of eat, sleep, breathe, exercise, like that for me, that's where it's at. And then it's all that finicky stuff on top of it.
I will say you don't want your surgeon having a hack. But your comments are really interesting. I think not so much for my medical portion of my life, but for the operational, tactical portion of my life, I think that is really important, and that is to look at history, whether it's our history or some other country's history, because if you don't study history, you will bite yourself in the long run. So it is very important to learn from the past.
Any other questions?
A Game of Tennis is a great book. It just made me think of the concept of flow.
Do you make any comment about, do you see flow? How do you get into flow?
I'm going to say this real quick and then I'm going to go to the airport. Okay, so in Csikszentmihalyi High's flow model, challenge and skill, and what happens when you have the right amount of skill for the challenge or the task, you feel engaged. And then what happens when the challenge is just slightly ahead of where your current skill is? You feel sort of immersed into the experience, and sometimes you lose track of space and time and all of these little marvelous outcomes. I mean, to cut to the chase, the number of athletes that have reported flow experiences under the pressure of Olympic Games is really small. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but if you are able to enter into flow and perform like in competition optimally, that's great. And I need to just back away and marvel at the chances. But I view my job is to help people manage themselves such that they can use their skills to meet the challenges, because we've all done this, right? We've all failed to perform under pressure, or we perform below expectations. So like that's where I'm interested in helping people navigate those types of challenges. I mean, again, flow is a real thing, and I'd be curious to hear about in your world, like the immersion into the task, and then hopefully it's going well. It's not you're nose diving and no one has any clue about it.
All right, thank you.